Well, hello there. Konnichiwa. This week we're on episode 125 of Streets and Eights, and that means that we're going to take you back to Japan and we're going to tell you how to road trip. We did, I don't know how many road trips we did in Japan, but we lived there over 5 years.
Right.
And that means we did a lot.
Yeah.
This week, Jim's got the trivia question. Woohoo.
All right. I think I'm going to get you this time.
Okay. You heard it, folks.
Okay. I was going to just ask you, what do you think is like the most significant tree in Japan? There's two of them, and I know you'd guess probably both of them eventually. So I decided to make it a little bit more pointed and maybe a little bit more difficult.
Because we're talking about trees.
Yeah. Well, we're not. But on a road trip,
You might want to stop by a tree, I guess.
part of what you're doing is looking at the scenery. And come on, Japan. Cherry blossoms, plum blossoms, peach blossoms.
A lot of blossoms.
All these flowering trees are pretty significant. However, I don't know that the cherry tree is the most significant tree in Japan. For me, I think that place goes to the ginkgo. So my question is about the ginkgo tree.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it a Japanese tree? I mean, I know they have ginkgo trees in Japan. Are they? I know they're endemic, I suppose, to Japan, but are they like? I don't know.
Well,
The answer
they're
is, I don't
actually
know.
they originated in China.
That's
and then they
what I
spread
was thinking.
throughout most of Asia. But definitely since at least the Edo period, the ginkgo tree has been pretty significant in Japanese culture. So I'm wondering if you know what its significance is in the culture.
What its significance is? Well, ginkgo biloba brings you healthy stuff, and the Japanese like tea, so I'm assuming that that's got to do with health and length of life and wisdom.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty close. Strength and resiliency. In fact,
I need some of that right now.
the ginkgo tree is one of the most resilient trees on the planet. It's been around since prehistoric times, since the dinosaurs. And it does a really good job of surviving through wars, fires, earthquakes. Even a ginkgo tree survived through the nuclear blast in Hiroshima. So it really has a strong place for strength and resiliency. Do you know anything else about the ginkgo tree you want to share?
Well, what I love about the ginkgo tree is that it's got a really cool shaped leaf, and those leaves kind of all turn golden in the late fall. I think it's one of the later fall colors.
Yeah.
And so you'll see a whole tree that's completely golden, and the leaves just hang on and hang on and hang on and hang on. And then all of a sudden, on one day, they all fall down.
They all fall down. And they stay golden for a very long time. Most like maple and colorful deciduous trees,
They turn brown eventually.
they turn brown, but not the ginkgo. It will eventually, but even dead on the ground, they're going to stay golden for a long time. So you end up with this golden carpet on the ground. It's just beautiful. I love that. I love that about the ginkgo tree. Okay,
I love lots of things about the ginkgo tree. And I do agree, if you're going to take the time to road trip around Japan, it gives you the opportunity to find things like that. And the Japanese are very good at revering old spirits. And I would say that a ginkgo tree would fall into that category. And oftentimes you'll be in some village somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, and you'll see a tree that has ropes and wishes tied to it, and you've never heard of it before. You didn't know to look there, that it was going to be there, but it is there, and they revere it, and it's beautiful, and it's well worth a stop. So I can see the connection there.
A lot of the times the road it's directed around the tree. Like the tree's there, we're building a road, but the tree's staying, and we're going to build the road around it.
And a lot of times with Japanese trees too, I mean, they take such good care of them that you'll see them propped up. Like if they get too old to hold up their branches, you like in the States when you have windstorms and these poor branches fall off and they just fall everywhere. But in Japan, once the branch starts getting too heavy, they'll build supports to hold that branch up. And maybe the support is not that far off the ground, but it's still a support, and
Yeah.
you don't ever have to worry about it really falling because they've already taken care of that. They think ahead that way. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Pretty cool.
A lot of trees get to be pretty old,
A lot of
like
trees.
thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are the two most what are the trees that are the most
The
revered?
ginkgo and the sakura, of course.
Oh, the kind of tree.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought you were going to say
Oh,
specific
specific trees.
trees because I know
There are some.
there are some. That's what I thought you were talking about. That there are some revered trees. One of them is in Tokyo Park called Rikuyen, and the reason I remember that is because I've just been posting lots of things on cherry blossoms, and it's a cherry blossom tree.
Right.
So it's a very revered tree that you can see right in the middle of Tokyo, but it's not a ginkgo. There are ginkgos there as well.
Yeah. So I think that kind of brings us to our topic today, road tripping in Japan and how to do it. And I guess the first question is,
Why? Why would you road trip?
why would you road trip in Japan?
So everybody thinks of Japan. They think of their trip that they're planning, and the first thing they think of is bullet trains and bullet train schedules and how to get from point A to point B and what to bring on the bullet train and go get your bento box and where
Right.
am I going to put my luggage and how do I make reservations? How do I get my seats? Do I sit in first class? Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a good way to travel.
It is
However, it's really a good way to travel only from
city to city.
point A to point B, city to city.
Yeah.
If you want to go somewhere different than that, a little different than the rest of the tourists are doing, something that a lot of people might not otherwise see, then I suggest that road tripping is
Yeah.
the best answer.
Well, like driving through that little village and seeing that ancient ginkgo tree in the middle of the road. You're not going to see that from the bullet train. You're just not. And you're not going to see that in the middle of the big city. So, yeah, I think public transportation is fabulous in Japan.
We love it.
For
We've
sure.
done it plenty of times.
But getting out and seeing the countryside and exploring and just going where you want to go, I mean, that's the main reason to do it. There are some other good reasons too. Like if you're traveling in a small group of 3 or 4, by the time you've paid for 3 or 4 people to ride the Shinkansen back and forth and, taxis to get back and forth to the station and all those other
What about
little
hauling your
things.
luggage
And luggage.
up and down stairs?
Yeah. If you've got a group of 3 or 4, it gets to a point where renting a car, even with the expensive toll roads, makes a lot of sense.
Well, we went on one time we were there at Christmas time visiting our daughter, and there were 5 of us.
Yeah.
And we rented a van, and we did a 2-week road trip, and we totaled up. That's the only time I think we really were diligent and totaling up the tolls, and it came to over $800. That's a lot of money for tools
Over what, like 2 weeks, right?
over 2 weeks. But it was for 5 people. And if you take the Shinkansen, say from Tokyo to Kyoto, because Kyoto was on our trip, we did a lot on that trip, but that was one of the stops.
lot.
Just from Tokyo to Kyoto and back, we would have paid over $500 for those tickets for 5
For
people.
those tolls. For
For the
tickets
train
on the
tickets.
Shinkansen.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, yeah, $800 sounds like a lot of money in tolls, but we had, on top of just going to Kyoto, we went to a lot of other places,
Yeah.
including Nara and Osaka and a rope bridge. We took a ferry and we did snow monkeys. We did a lot, and we were all over the place.
Yeah.
Compared to going back and forth to one city for basically around the same amount of cost.
Right.
So, personally, I think it was well worth it. But it's something each person needs to figure out on their own, I
Yeah.
suppose. You
Yeah.
know?
And how much time you have and what your expectations are to see and do while you're there definitely plays into it. But it can be actually get to a point where it is cost effective, especially if you have a lot of luggage. It's just convenient.
Well, yeah. You put your luggage in the back of the car versus schlepping it up and down the platforms. And in Japanese trains, there's
Whether you
this
have a
whole
spot.
thing, whether or not you can. Sometimes you have to pay more to have a spot. Sometimes you need to reserve your luggage. It can get quite complicated. They also have a service where you can pay to send your luggage from one area to another.
Yeah,
so
it's
you can
pretty
do that.
convenient.
It's a convenient service, but you're going to pay for it. So there's all these different ways that you can do it. I think the most specific reason, the best reason to road trip is to discover something you wouldn't normally discover.
I think so
I mean,
too.
we travel to meet locals and to be in the real part of the country. And when you're in the hinterlands and the backcountry, that's when you're going to feel like you're really traveling.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in Tokyo, which I mean, I love Tokyo, not bashing Tokyo, but it's a completely different type of travel and a different feeling than when you go into some of these smaller villages. And I've got instance after instance after instance of times when we had no idea that something was happening or something
Oh, yeah.
existed in this particular place, and we found it because we were road tripping. The first one that comes to mind is when we were road tripping in Tohoku. We were going in the spring, and boom, there's this Koma festival. First of all, what's a Koma festival? Never heard of it. And we're like, well, it's a festival. We're road tripping. We've got time. Let's stop. To this day, after 5 more years of traveling in Japan, that's got to be one of my number one things that we've ever done there.
Yeah.
A Koma festival, for those of you like me who didn't know what it was,
And me.
is archery from horseback. What?
Yeah.
So cool. Traditional
cool.
clothes, riding horses, shooting arrows, fast and furious.
It was pretty
harkens
amazing.
back to samurai times.
Right.
Just really cool. Would we have ever seen? Well, first of all, we didn't know about it, so we would have never looked it up to see where Koma festivals are, which you
Right.
can do a little bit easier probably now
Well, yeah.
that you've heard of it. But second of all, we just had the time and the opportunity, and we were there, and we were like, yeah,
Park the car. We're getting out.
we're doing this.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
Those stumble upons.
Yeah.
Those
a
are-
stumble upon. Exactly.
Those are really the best reason for it.
Exactly. Another one, which was not on the same road trip, but on our Kyushu road trip. We're going down south, and we had stopped at the rest stations, which the rest stations in Japan on the motorways are just
Clean.
clean, gorgeous. They have everything you need. I mean, they're great to go to. You might want to stop just because they have, like the one that I'm thinking of. They had maple leaf, not just cookies and crackers, but maple leaves that you could eat.
Pretty much everything maple.
It was like a maple area, maple season. Anyway, but we're driving down to the Kyushu Peninsula, and we're in this town. We just stopped there because we needed a hotel. It was on the way. It was about halfway down. It was a good place to stop. I have no reason to be there. No reason other than
Place to stop for the
place
night.
to stop. It has a whole street. The whole town is dedicated to this manga artist.
Yeah.
The whole street, over 100 statues of different manga.
Really
that
cool
he made.
statues.
He's famous for Kitaro. I think his name is Sikero.
Oh, I'd have to look it up.
It used to be Mura, but then they changed it Mizeki or something like that. Anyway, I got it on the blog, so you can look at the
Right.
show notes. But I mean, we spent 2 days looking at these statues. We ended up spending a lot of time. It was so much fun. We were being kids. There were so many people around. Everybody there to look at them, and there were people there looking at them.
Yeah.
All Japanese.
Well, yeah.
And not one other foreigner except for us.
And we just
And-
stumbled upon that.
Again, a stumble upon. I mean, that is, like I said, I have example after example after example. For me, that's what makes traveling exciting. That's what makes it
Yeah.
memorable. That's what sets my feeling of what I accomplished there maybe a little bit better than what I had expected, which is always good. You don't want to go and just have that
Yeah.
expected experience.
Right?
You want it to be better than that.
If you just go and you follow the guidebook, not that people
You're gonna
use
have a good time.
not that people use guidebooks anymore, but for instance, yeah, you're going to see what you want to see. You're going to have a good time. But you're not going to see as much of the unexpected.
I don't think you're going to get as personal with it.
Yeah.
I think when you're driving, it's more personal.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? And when you're on the train or when you're on a bus tour or if you fly from spot to spot, these are all great ways to do it. And hey, if that's what time you have and the way you want to do it, you go for it. I've done it that way too.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like when I drive, I just have this like really strong connection to the land, to the landmarks, to, just to the people, to these little tiny mom and pop restaurants that not only have I never heard of, but you can't really, they may or may not even be on the internet anymore.
Half the time they're not in Japan.
Because it's like they're tiny. But they're
no English
great.
menu. What they have is hung up on little pieces of wood in Japanese.
Sometimes it's in katakana, so we can read that.
Right.
Or hiragana, which we can read. What we can't read, well,
The kanji.
very few, is the kanji. And, of course, some of them have that as well. But the other side to it is, it's one of those things that either they might have a little case outside with the plastic food that you can bring the waiters out and you can say, this is what I want.
Right.
Or you just say, hey, throw your hands
Bring me
in
something
the air
good.
and say, feed me.
Yeah.
And you know what? I've never, ever, ever had a bad meal. They've never done me wrong. It's never even that expensive.
You're better off saying that. Bring me something to eat for dinner or lunch than just randomly pointing at one of the pieces of wood, because you never really know what the pieces of wood say. And you might end up with something really bizarre that's not actually a meal. So, yeah, I would always ask in those situations. Or point if
we've
there's...
done both. We've done both.
Yeah.
We've done it all because we've been there for... And, I think road tripping is convenient. It's not just convenient for your luggage or the things that you want to bring with you or buying souvenirs and having a place to put them or what have you. But it's convenient because I like to take a lot of photos.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the secret about Japan that you may or may not know. It's a cool place.
It's beautiful.
Everywhere you go is cool. It's got culture and it's got cuteness and it's got friendly people and
Amazing
it's clean
architecture, landscapes.
Everywhere you go. So what I'm saying about that is that means for me as a photographer, it's like I have a picture, 100 pictures, pretty much anywhere I want to stop. And I've got this driver.
Yeah.
And I say, I need that photo. And
I
this
say,
is what this guy does.
if she says, I need that photo, I say, what are you talking about? What are you supposed to say if you want a photo?
Stop.
You have to say stop.
Okay, so this has evolved obviously throughout our
Every
time together.
every road trip we start, we'll miss a photo because she didn't say stop. She said, "Oh, that was pretty. Ooh, that was ooh. I think I need that picture." Like, what's the word? Stop. You say stop. I stop. You gotta say stop. You say stop. I stop, and I'll back up.
Okay, so we developed this over the years, but I don't always say stop. And sometimes this is what I'll do. I'll be like, I like that. Oh, and then I think, and then half a mile, 2 miles, 10 miles down the road, I'm like, oh God, no, you got to turn around. I got to have that photo.
10 miles, it probably won't happen.
I don't know.
Half
I
a
think
mile.
we've gone quite a far before, and we've
We
done
have.
everything from him dropping me off and coming back and pick me up later.
Oh yeah.
I'm hiking down the middle.
Sometimes you can't just stop.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's just. But anyway, my point is, I don't want to miss those photos. That's like what I live for. So I want to be able to stop. I don't
Yeah.
want to be looking out a train window and going,
Snap, and you end up with
nothing.
like,
You end up with nothing.
flying by pole or something in your picture.
No,
because
it's
you
not
don't
even
notice
worth
those.
it. Anyway, we love road tripping. We've been done it all over. So I think the convenience, and especially for people who really want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. I want to stop when I want to stop. I want to eat when I want to eat. I want to just do things when I want to do them.
Yeah, that's right. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole purpose.
Porpoise, you know this.
That's the whole purpose, is to get out, see everything you want to see things you don't know you want to see, and experience it.
Experience.
Okay, so
That's right.
a lot of
So-
people, I think, would be scared to drive in Japan.
I think so too.
So
I
we
think
should talk a little bit about driving in Japan and kind of maybe assuage some of those fears, or, point out what you do really need to be careful about.
ready?
Okay, so the obvious thing is you drive on the left.
Which I think a lot of people are very frightened to do. Now, of course, if you're from the UK or from Australia,
Yeah.
okay, so you're used
No
to it
problem.
and you're like, hey, got this in the bag. But you know what? We've driven on
Many,
the
many
left
places,
many
yeah.
places, and I'm not going to say that it's 100% easy to do, but it's easier than you think it is.
It really
to
is,
do.
especially since you're going to be driving a car that's designed for that road system. So it actually becomes very natural, I think.
The time it's not natural. Like, I think just driving, if you've got traffic, if you're following traffic patterns, if you're got lines on the road, all that kind of stuff, I mean, driving is for dummies in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's pretty simple.
You're just following.
You're just following and you're going with the traffic flow. And as a driver who's driven other places, that's pretty intuitive. When it gets difficult are things like if you're driving on a small road with not very many markings or no markings, or you're coming out of a small village and or you're turning and there's nobody on the road.
Yeah,
because those are the times when you don't have a reference. But here's the good thing about those. First of all, the Japanese are the most polite drivers in the world.
They really are.
We have had times, this is no exaggeration, we have had times where we're waiting at a stoplight and the person coming at you is turning, or we're turning, or whatever. I guess we're turning because normally the turning person would wait, right?
Right.
The Japanese person waits for you. They're like, no, you get to go first.
They'll give you a little wave.
They're like,
they bow.
Go ahead. They bow. It's your turn.
Happens so often.
It's kind of interesting because other places are just the opposite. If you don't take the bull by the horns, or
they will.
They're going to cut in front of you and all kinds of stuff. This is probably not going to happen in Japan. So it's a very calm driving atmosphere. And so if you find yourself in one of those situations, and we have, where you're pulling out of a small road and there's nobody on the road and you're merrily going down the right side of the road because that's what we're used to and that's what you automatically do, and you see a car coming, guess what? You have time to get over. It's not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
We lived there for over 5 years. How many people did we ever hear of having an accident because they were driving on the left?
Very few accidents there.
Very few accidents.
And certainly not from driving on the wrong side of the
zero.
road. Yeah.
So it's not as scary as it seems, and it's well worth, I think, trying.
Well, a part of that is they're a very well-trained driving population. You can't just go run out and get your license with a little bit of practice. They have schools like you would not believe, set up with tracks and lights and pedestrians, and it's just incredible. So they all go through this really good training. On top of that, the rules of the road are very clear. They're very well marked. The speed limits are very low. I think like the max you can go nowadays is 100 on the expressway.
On the expressway.
Yeah.
Not in a back road.
Which is something to keep in mind when you're going from one big city to another big city far away. It's going to take some time, but just you count that into it. People do go a little bit faster than the speed limit. I think the cameras...
Not very much faster.
There's some cameras, but they're set up not like in Europe where if you're going 2 kilometers per hour over the speed limit, you're going to get your picture taken. They're set up more like 10 or 15 kilometers over. I don't count on that. I
remember seeing it.
I never count on that. And there's not a lot of them.
I think, though, that you touched on another big, scary issue for people, and that is being able to read the signage. So every road sign, every single one of them, is going to have both romaji and either kanji or hiragana, which is Japanese writing, as well as the romaji, which is Western writing.
Yeah.
So when it says Tokyo, it's going to say Tokyo in kanji, because the majority of people reading it are going to be reading the kanji. And it's also going to say right underneath it, Tokyo. Yeah. So you know where to go. You don't have to worry about having to interpret the signs. That is not going to be an issue.
No.
You definitely can read where things are and what city you're going to and what have you.
Sure.
That is not a problem at all. So, and I think that's a fear. I mean, I think it was a fear for me when I first started driving there. I was like, am I going to be able to find my way? I mean, we go in some back roads, let me tell you.
Now, I'll say this. When you get into the cities, I think, well, first of all, you should just park the car and use public transportation. But the signage in cities, in Tokyo, that is super confusing.
It can be.
With different expressways and electronic signs that shift to different routes to take because of the traffic. I think it makes perfect sense to the drivers there, but for a visitor,
It could be really rough.
you really don't want to be driving in Tokyo, except for maybe on a Sunday morning
Yeah.
at around 6 or 7 in the
tip that Jim and I always
6 or
have.
7 o'clock in the morning. The streets are barren. You can drive all over the city. It's incredible.
Well, and speaking of photography, if you get up and you have a driver on Sunday morning, you can hit all those places and like the Tokyo Tree and, the parks and, the castle. You can go to all of those
The tower,
places
yeah.
with nobody around and get your photos. And in the summer, the timing is different. So the sun rises at like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get up early. But you want to get up early and avoid the people anyway. But
Yeah.
Jim is right. Like we used to go out, even by like 8 o'clock, there weren't too many people out. And we would get lots of photos
Yeah.
where there's nobody in our photo. And we're talking Tokyo. There's
Yeah.
20 million people who live in the Tokyo area? I mean,
It's incredible.
it's incredible. So that's a good tip too.
Yeah. Cities are difficult. Park the car, use public transportation. Once you leave the city, driving is a breeze. I mean, it is so easy to navigate. You're driving on the left. Yes, you get used to that really quick. People are friendly drivers. It's just super easy. We lived in Japan for 5 years, off and on, I think 2 different times. And yes, we had our own car. But for like when we did the 5 of us traveling around, we rented a van because that just made more sense. Car rental in Japan used to be pretty challenging, but nowadays super easy. There's like 3 major brands, Toyota, Nippon, and Times. And I think most people recommend Toyota rental car because I know they have a really good website. They're all over the place and they have a really good service response if you need help. So most people recommend them. I would too.
I don't think there's much difference though
Yeah.
in any of the things. I think
Oh,
we
yeah.
actually rented from Times.
We have rented from
We've
Times
rented
once.
from Times before.
Worked out just fine.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's a service-oriented society.
Yeah.
They're going to help you if you need help.
Yeah.
And it's not one of those societies that's out to get you either.
No.
Now,
yeah.
that's not to mean you shouldn't buy the extra insurance.
You really
It
should.
is a completely foreign
Mm-hmm.
place. So on top of the fact that you don't know where you are, there is language and
Yeah.
there is different customs and there is, those types of obstacles that you wouldn't normally have to worry about as much. I think it's just prudent
Yeah.
to go ahead and get the extra insurance.
Usually we stick with what we have available through our regular insurance or through the credit card. But for places like Japan, if I was driving in Thailand or other places that are not as familiar, I think you really should get the extra insurance.
Especially because, and we didn't even think about this, they have these ditches on the side of the
Ooh,
road.
Right?
So that is one thing that you got to pay attention to, because especially on the back roads. I mean, this is not, I don't think, as prevalent. Although when we lived in Kamakura,
Typically
they
they're
had some.
covered in the city, so
Yeah,
it's every now and then one of the covers will break, so you can't count on driving on that. But usually it's not like a catastrophe if you have to swerve off the road a little bit.
but right at the edge of the road is this ditch. Like Jim said, might have a cement cover, or it might not. And so if you go off the road at all, you're going to go into the ditch. Now it's not this huge ditch. It's just a narrow little ditch, but it's enough to.
It's usually concrete, and if you go into it, you're not getting out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Well, it rains so much there, they have to have good drainage.
Yeah, that's what it's
and
for.
that's really what it's
Yeah.
for.
Exactly.
So-
Anyway, it's not a big deal. But
It's
it's
really-
something that I always paid attention to for sure.
Right. The big thing to remember renting a car is make a reservation early so you can get the car you want. But make sure you have your international driver's permit. And whoever's going to drive needs their own international driver's permit. Now, that's not really a big deal, but you need to have it before you leave home. You can't get it in Japan. You have to get it in the country where you live. You just go to the AAA, bring your license down, and it's just a translation of your license with a photograph of you in it. But you need that to rent a car in Japan for sure.
I think one thing that is really important to remember is that driving while having a beer is a completely different level in Japan than it is in the United States or elsewhere, Germany, United Kingdom. Their levels are very, very low. They have zero tolerance for driving and drinking.
For sure.
But they have ways to avoid it. First of all, the public transportation system is great.
Mm-hmm.
But better than that, if you find yourself out at a restaurant and you've driven to it and you start drinking beer because there's beer everywhere and it's good.
Yeah.
And,
or sake.
You have one of those big beers and you're going to be over the limit. That's just the way it is. But what they have is a taxi system where you can call the taxi. You can tell them that you have a car. So they will send 2 drivers and they will put you in the taxi and they will drive you back to your hotel. And they will put the other driver in your car. You'll give them the keys and they'll drive that car to your hotel for you. Yeah, you're going to pay for it. But, I mean, it's genius.
Better
Why
to pay
doesn't
for it.
every country have this system?
Yeah.
And of course, maybe it's going to be hard for you with limited Japanese to order it. But you know what? You don't have to. The restaurateur is more than happy to call the taxi for you. And let me tell you something. It's well worth it because the fines, the penalties are heavy. Fines and jail time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody says, well, I only have 1 glass of wine. Don't just have 1 glass of wine. If you're walking, fine. If you're taking public transportation, fine. Don't drive.
Have 2.
Yeah, have 2. Have 3.
Have a glass of plum wine.
Oh, plum wine.
Favorite.
Our favorite. Yeah.
Okay, the last thing I want to talk about with rental cars and driving in general is the tolls. We mentioned the tolls can be very expensive. Be prepared for it. Count it in your budget and you'll be okay. But how do you pay those tolls? Now, the last time we were driving there, this was still true. And after doing a little bit of research, it hasn't really changed. For the tolls, you can pick up a ticket and then pay the toll at the other end.
Like anywhere.
Well, that's not true.
We
Don't
read
drive
it.
around Paris and expect to do that.
Yeah, things
It's
in Paris
electronic.
are changing. That's another podcast.
And they do have electronic toll collection as well. It's called the ETC card. Your best bet is to talk to your rental agency before you leave with your car and say, I'm going to be on the expressway. I know I'm going to have tolls. Can I get an ETC card that's activated? And it's usually no problem. If they have one available, they'll give it to you. If you get there late in the day and they've given them all out, you might be out of luck. But typically you're going to get one. And then you just reconcile at the rental company when you get done.
Yeah.
It's the best way to do it.
And tolls can be hefty, really hefty.
Yeah.
So it is something to budget for sure.
Yeah, and that way
I think that's the biggest downside to renting a car.
it really is. The gas is expensive, but not like more expensive than Europe or other places like that. Not really cost prohibitive, I don't think.
Well, I don't think any of it's cost prohibitive.
Okay, so this is the fun part. Let's talk about some of our favorite road trips that we take.
This first one, Mount Fuji, we didn't just do it once. We didn't just do it twice. We didn't just do it 3 times.
I don't know how many times we did it.
We love going to Mount Fuji in every way, shape, or form that you can.
Yeah.
So
Well, it looks different
every time
depending on the season.
That's right.
And even in the same season, it's going to look different. So it's always stunning. It's always a spectacular road trip.
And there's so many places to see it. It's so beautiful. One of the best ways to get to Mount Fuji is to go on the Izu Peninsula and go by Kamakura and Enoshima. And there's so many places to stop.
Odawara Castle is right there.
Odawara Castle is a beautiful place. And it's very quiet. And most people, if they think of castles in Japan, they don't think of Odawara. Yet it's
beautiful.
stunning.
Especially with the different times of year. If you're there for cherry blossoms or plum blossoms or in the fall, gorgeous. Every spring is gorgeous with those 2 conditions.
Yeah. Lake Kawaguchiko is beautiful, and there's lots of Fuji views from there. It's just a good trip. So we were always finding different places to go. We went through Hakone. We just all over the place. There's so many things to do and see. And it's probably one of our favorite things to do.
Yeah, a good 2, 3, or even 4-day trip, depending on how much you want to see, where you want to stop. Like you could stop in Hakone, which is an onsen capital not too far out of Tokyo on the coast. Beautiful up in the mountains with the ocean down below and just some really stunning onsen. That's a good place to stop. Kawaguchiko with the lake looking out across to Fuji. That's a great place to stop for the night.
There's plenty of places.
Oh, yeah.
And there's plenty of places to do onsen, which if you travel Japan, you should at least do at least once. And some of them are just foot onsen. So you don't even have to get naked. You just take your shoes and socks off. I love those.
That's a good one.
And of course, there's great food everywhere, great views. It's great. Okay, so that's Fuji. Another one that we've done a few times, at least two, maybe, I think 3 times. We've done it 3 times, is to go down through Osaka to Nara and Kyoto. Because, I mean, whenever you have people come visit, for us, that's where they want to go. I mean, those are the big names, right? And they're for good reason. There's plenty to do there. There's plenty to see. And the trip is gorgeous. There's a few castles to see along the way. There's good shopping. There's great markets. There's great food. Like Kyoto's known for the kiseki meals and maiko shows. And I mean, there's enough to do in all those places that you can't run out of things to do. One thing that we did that we didn't really know about, but our daughters told us about it, was the Mei house, where it's a house, a Japanese traditional house that was patterned after the guy who wrote Totoro and
Ghibli. Ghibli Studios. I forget his name, but yeah. Anyway, so it's the house from Totoro, if you're familiar with the movie. And it's set in this park-like setting, beautiful gardens, just really incredible. And you're not going to get there without a car.
You're not going to get there without a car. And you've never done anything like this before. You go in there and you can open the drawers. You can take the stuff out. You can look at everything. You can play with it, photograph it, do whatever you want. I mean, you put it back and then you it's just very cool. It's just so not what we're used to.
And while we did talk about driving in the cities can be challenging, Kyoto is a pretty small city. You can actually drive in Kyoto, find parking, and get around. But what's better about it, having a car there, is some of the temples and like the bamboo forest,
favorite temple,
are further out. And yes, you can get there on a small bus.
Or a train. Some of them
some of them on train. But it's a bit of a challenge, and you're really restricted on the timing. So having a car in those situations is great. And I've never really had any trouble driving in Kyoto. Osaka, big city, park the car at the hotel, public transportation for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Getting to Nara and being able to drive around and find a good parking area and go to the different temples, a car is really helpful for that too.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to take a tour.
So that's another one that we did quite frequently. We have done other ones. We did, like I mentioned, we did the Kyushu Peninsula, the Kyushu Island, the southern island. We did that at spring break because we wanted to go cherry blossom hunting. But it's, Japan seems like a very small country, and coming from the United States, it really seems small. But it always amazes me how different places can be in a small country.
Yeah.
And so Kyushu is different than Honshu. Honshu is different than Hokkaido. Hokkaido is different than Okinawa. So it is really worth going to all those different places and exploring them, because the food is different. The people speak a little bit different. They even look a little bit differently. They just, it's different. It's fun. It's beautiful. Another one of our favorite road trips that we did multiple times is to Matsumoto.
And into the mountains around Nagano and that area, and out to Shirakawa, the thatched roof gashi houses, World Heritage Site.
Lots of places to go.
So many places to go.
We'll have more listed than you could possibly do on one trip anyway. So you have to pick and choose. And maybe, you can plan the next 5 years by doing road trips in Japan, because there's really that much to do, at least. Anyway, I hope we've convinced you that driving in Japan is not scary. It's well worth a little bit of effort, and it affords you an opportunity to see Japan a little bit differently
For sure.
than if you're just going to fly in and visit Tokyo, take the Shinkansen to Kyoto, and then go back. It's gonna open your eyes.
It really is. And you're going to love it.
So sayonara.
Sayonara. Ciao for now.
Ciao for now. Sayonara.